the partner who stole my patent. There is a kind of betrayal that doesn't shout. It doesn't slam a door. It doesn't break a glass. It sits there, polite as a business card, in a paragraph of ordinary language, and it takes you a minute, sometimes two, to understand what it has just done to you. That morning, it took me 90 seconds. That was how long I spent reading the email from the patent attorney's office, opening the PDF attached to it, scrolling past the boilerplate, and arriving at the inventor line on page 3. My name was not on it. Rick's was. Only Rick's. Rick and I met in a way I now find almost embarrassing to describe, because it sounds like the opening of a story about friendship rather than the opening of a story about what a friendship can hide. It was a diner outside Austin called the Bluebonnet, the kind of place that serves breakfast at 4 in the afternoon and doesn't apologize for it. I had gone there to think. I had just walked out of a job I'd held for 11 years, at a company whose name I won't mention, because naming it would be petty, and because by the end of this story you will see that petty is not a thing I have the taste for anymore. Rick was at the counter, alone. He had a laptop open and a half-eaten plate of pancakes beside it, and he was swearing at a spreadsheet. That is how we met. I asked him what he was doing. He told me. Inside of 20 minutes, he was sketching the shape of a business on a paper placemat, and I was sketching the shape of a machine on the back of it. He was a salesman. I was an engineer. He had spent 6 years selling industrial equipment for a larger firm and had seen exactly what the small refineries and chemical plants in East Texas and Oklahoma were being overcharged for. The valve, he said. The valve was the scam. The pressure-compensating valves the big manufacturers were selling for $12,000 a unit were no better, he said, holding up his fork like a gavel, than a design any competent engineer could draw up for a fraction of the price. The refineries knew it. They were buying the expensive ones because they had to, because the small shop competitors couldn't produce its spec, couldn't hold tolerances, couldn't certify. I drew the valve for him on the placemat. It took me 4 minutes. He watched. "Can you make that?" he said. I said, "I can make that better." By the time our coffees were cold, we had agreed on a handshake in a Texas diner where a woman in a Cowboys jersey was refilling sugar dispensers 2 booths away that we would go into business together. 50-50. No written contract. Not yet. He would handle the sales and the operations. I would handle the design and the build. We would find money. We would incorporate. We would split everything equally. He said, "I want to work with you." I said, "I want to work with you." Those were, I think, the only 2 lies told at that table. I don't know if they were lies at the moment they were spoken. I would like to believe they weren't. But I know that one of them had become a lie within the year, and I know the other one never did. We incorporated. The paperwork was cheap in Texas, and the waiting was short. We registered an LLC with the 2 of us as equal members, and we signed an operating agreement that I drafted from a template and Rick reviewed and changed in 3 or 4 places, in ways I thought were reasonable at the time and whose consequences I would not understand for another 3 years. I worked out of my garage for the first 6 months. I built 3 prototypes of the valve. Each one was better than the one before it. By the time I had a unit I was willing to put my name on, we had raised $200,000 from a friend of Rick's who ran a family office in Houston, and we had rented a small building just off I-35 with a loading dock and a corner office that smelled like cigars. Rick took the office. I took the shop floor. This division was fine with me. I had not gone into business for the office. I had gone into business to build. And Rick, to his credit, and I will give him this, because I am not interested in denying him anything he actually earned, was very good at selling the valve. He could walk into a plant manager's office in Corpus Christi or Beaumont and, within 40 minutes, walk out with a purchase order for 12 units and a second one pending on next quarter's budget. He had the gift of making the person across from him feel that they were not being sold to, that they were being let in on something, that Rick was offering them a favor and they were lucky he had thought of them. Our first year, we did $1.4 million in revenue. Our second year, for $0.20. Somewhere in the middle of that second year, I told Rick we should file a patent. He agreed immediately. He was enthusiastic. He said, and I remember the phrase because it sounded, even then, A little too rehearsed. That's the moat. That's what makes us defensible. We have to do it. I drafted the specification myself. 43 pages. Diagrams, claim language, a detailed write-up of the novelty over the prior art. I gave it to Rick. Rick said he would take it to a patent attorney his family office friend had recommended, a firm in Dallas. I said, "Do you want me to come to the meeting?" He said, "No need. It's just paperwork. I'll handle it. I want to be clear about something." I was not naive. I had filed patents before at my previous job. I knew what the inventor line looked like. I knew what a sole inventorship declaration was. I knew, in the abstract, that what Rick was asking me, to step back and let him handle the paperwork, was the exact thing I should not have done. I did it anyway. I did it because we had been working together for 2.5 years at that point, and because he was the best man I knew at getting anything done outside the shop, and because I trusted him. That is the part one have thought about the most in the years since. Not the filing. Not what happened after. The moment at the whiteboard in our office when he told me he'd handle the paperwork, and I said, "Sure, thanks." The thing about trust is that it is a door you leave unlocked. Whether anyone walks through it is a choice they make, not you. The email came on a Tuesday morning in June. It was from the patent attorney's office in Dallas, and it was a courtesy notice. The non-provisional application we had filed 9 months earlier had been granted. The patent number was attached. So was the issued copy. I opened the PDF. I scrolled. There, on page 3, under the word inventors, there was one name. Richard J. Not mine. I read it 3 times before my mind let the words through. Then I stood up from my desk, walked to the door of my office, closed it, and sat back down. I opened the patent history. I went to the USPTO public records, and I pulled the original filing. I read the declaration of inventorship. I read the oath. I read the sentence in which Rick had sworn, under penalty of perjury, that he was the sole inventor of the pressure compensating valve that I had designed on a placemat in front of him 2.5 years earlier. I did not say anything. I did not call him. I did not email him. I did not walk down the corridor to his office. I did, instead, what anyone who has ever been betrayed the right way has done. I waited until the shock had drained out of me, which took about an hour, and then I went back to work. Between the moment I discovered what Rick had done and the moment I did anything about it, for years past. I want you to sit with that number for a second. For years. People often ask me, now, why I didn't confront him. Why I didn't quit. Why I didn't call a lawyer on the afternoon I read the patent and sue him on the afternoon after that. And the honest answer is that I could have. I even came close, for about 2 days. I drafted a letter. I did not send it. I put it in a drawer. I did not send it because of something I had learned, years earlier, from my father, who spent his working life as a contracts lawyer in Cleveland and who once told me, when I was 18 years old and furious about a boy at school who had taken credit for a project I'd done alone, that anger is a weapon that tells the enemy exactly where you are pointed. The quieter you get, my father said, the harder you become to plan against. I put the letter in the drawer. I kept showing up to the shop. I kept designing. I kept building. Rick took me to dinner twice a month and asked me how the next unit was coming along, and I told him, and he nodded, and he paid the check. I was not biding my time. Biding your time implies a kind of impatience dressed up in patience. I was doing something more disciplined than that. I was letting him settle into the story he had told himself about who he was and what he had gotten away with. I was letting the patent he had taken from me become, in his mind, something that belonged to him. Because a man who believes he has gotten away with something is, eventually, a man who stops watching for the thing he got away with to come back. That is the thing about betrayals like this. The betrayer doesn't keep staring at the crime. He looks away from it. He has to, in order to live with it. And over time, the place he isn't looking becomes the exact place you're free to work. What I worked on, quietly, for 4 years, was this. The patent Rick filed covered the valve as I had originally drawn it. 43 pages. It was a good patent. It was, by any reasonable assessment, the most important document our company had. But it was not the only document that mattered. In the 2 years we'd been in business, I had made improvements to the valve, dozens of them. materials changes, a better sealing geometry, a revised flow compensation algorithm for the microcontroller that sat inside the newer units. Small things, individually. Collectively, the difference between a unit that lasted 18 months in the field and a unit that lasted 7 years. None of these improvements were in Rick's patent, because he had filed it before any of them existed. So what I did, in the 2.5 years after I discovered what Rick had done, was this. I kept making improvements. And every time I made one, every single time, I filed a continuation patent, in my own name, from my own personal email address, using a patent attorney in Denver whom Rick had never heard of and who did not know Rick existed. I paid for these filings out of my own pocket. I filed 14 of them over 40 months. Every one covered a specific improvement to the original valve design. Every one referenced the original patent, Rick's patent, as prior art. And every one was filed, legally and meticulously, in the name of the actual inventor of those improvements, which was me. None of them went through the company. None of them appeared on any company ledger or filing or board report. Rick did not know they existed. By the end of the 4th year, the commercial reality was this. Rick's patent covered a valve nobody actually wanted anymore. The valve anybody actually bought. The valve the refineries in East Texas were sending purchase orders for. The valve that accounted for 93% of our revenue was built according to my improvement patents. Without them, the company was selling a 2019 product in a 2023 market. With them, it was a market leader. And those improvement patents belonged, personally, to me. There was one more thing I did in the last 6 months of those 4 years, and it was the piece that required the most care. Rick's company, our company, was preparing to raise a Series B. The family office in Houston that had given us the initial $200,000 was leading again. The round was $32 million at a $140 million valuation. Rick was thrilled. He sent me a case of good wine from Napa when the term sheet was signed. I drank 1 bottle of it. I gave the rest to a neighbor. The family office's diligence lawyer, a careful, methodical woman who worked out of Dallas, sent us, about 6 weeks before closing, a request for a full patent inventory. This was standard. Investors always want to know what intellectual property they are buying. Rick forwarded the request to me, as he forwarded most technical requests to me, without reading it closely. He said, "Pull this together, would you? They need it by Friday." I pulled it together. I sent her, on Thursday afternoon, a complete and truthful inventory. It listed Rick's original patent. It listed, alongside it, the 14 improvement patents I had filed over the preceding 4 years, each of them in my personal name, none of them assigned to the company. I attached the filing dates. I attached the USPTO public records. I attached a short note, polite and factual, explaining that these improvement patents had not been assigned to the company and were held personally by me. I did not blind copy Rick on the email. I did not copy him at all. I did not need to. The diligence lawyer did that for me, the next morning. There is a certain kind of phone call that is better not described in detail. Rick's phone call to me, that Friday afternoon, was one of those. I listened. I did not argue. I did not apologize. I waited until he had said what he had come to say, and then I said, "We should meet on Monday. Bring counsel." Here is what happened on Monday, in a conference room on the 32nd floor of an office building in downtown Dallas. The family office's diligence lawyer was there. Rick was there, with his attorney. I was there, with mine, who was a quiet woman in her 60s who had not said a word to Rick since shaking his hand. The diligence lawyer laid out the situation in the dry, efficient tone people use for conclusions they reached over the weekend. The company, she said, did not own the patents it was selling. The inventor of the original patent had sworn a sole inventorship declaration that, on its face, appeared to be false. The company's entire product line, at current revenue, depended on improvement patents that were held personally by the co-founder whom the original inventor had, apparently, omitted from the original declaration. She did not use the word fraud. She did not need to. The family office's position was simple. They would not be investing at a $140 million valuation or at any valuation. in a company whose intellectual property foundation was, in her words, unstable. They would withdraw from the Series B. They would, however, remain willing to invest at a much reduced valuation in a restructured entity, one in which the original patent was amended at the USPTO to include me as a co-inventor consistent with the facts on the record, one in which the improvement patents were, on mutually agreed commercial terms, licensed to the company, and one in which, as a condition of their participation, Rick's equity was diluted to a minority stake and I was made chief executive. Rick objected. His attorney was more measured but objected also. They asked for a week to think. My attorney, speaking for the first time, said that was fine. She added that we had, of course, not yet decided whether to file a petition with the USPTO to correct inventorship, which would trigger an investigation of the original filing declaration. She said this in the same tone one uses to mention a change in the weather. They took the week. Then they took the deal. I am writing this 6 years later, in a town I won't name, at a kitchen table in a house with a garden I'm learning to take care of. The company is larger now than it ever was under Rick. I ran it for 3 years, and then I sold my majority stake to a larger industrial conglomerate out of Chicago, and I made a quiet, dignified amount of money on the way out. Rick stayed on as a minority shareholder. He did not attend the closing dinner. I have been asked, more than once, whether I regret the 4 years of silence. Whether I should have confronted him on the morning the patent came through, or the evening of, or the Wednesday after. I don't regret it. Not because I am proud of the silence. I am not especially proud of anything in this story, but because I understand, now, what those 4 years were actually for. They were not for revenge. They were for the thing revenge gets confused with, which is restoration. If I had confronted Rick on the morning I discovered what he'd done, I would have been angry and I would have been right, and he would have had the upper hand anyway, because he had the patent and he had the company's legal cover and he had the family office's initial capital, and I had a design on a placemat that I could not prove was mine. For years later, I did not need to prove anything. The record proved it. The record I had quietly built, week by week, filing by filing, while Rick forgot, while Rick looked away, while Rick slowly settled into the comforting story he had told himself about who he was. The silence was not a strategy. The silence was the space I needed in order to become someone he could not plan against. A friend once asked me what I would say to Rick if I saw him now. I don't think I would say anything. I would nod if I had to. I would not shake his hand. I would not need to do anything else. Because the story, at this point, is finished. And the thing about a story that is finished is that it doesn't require you to tell it anymore. It tells itself.